Hello everyone, good evening. I'm sharing my screen. We'll pick it up from where we have left off in our previous session, guys. To close this. Let me log into OIC instance first. And I'll also check the Fusion instance connectivity. So we've created the file transfer service in our previous session and we have tested it as well. We discussed how to debug the integration. We discussed the scheduling options as well. And finally, we covered the integration design considerations as well, right? So whenever you create a new integration in OIC, especially if it is inbound integrations, there are a few considerations that you need to think of. And based on the considerations, or you need to ask the client a few questions. And based on the responses that you get to these questions, you need to decide whether you have to follow a file-based approach or a web service-based approach in your integration. I've explained this in detail, and we will be starting off with a complex journal import SOAP service today. And in this integration and in the next one, which is going to be complex AP invoice REST API, we will be using web service-based approach in these two integrations. Okay, the expectation is that you build integration flow in OIC, which is capable of importing journals here and importing AR invoices into cloud using web services. And then we go on to file-based automations. Now, I want you guys to help me here. So the expectation is, yes, we are building this integration for HSBC, and they have a core banking system where journals get created all through the day. And not all through the day, they have a core banking system where journals get created. And they want to invoke your integration. So what's the ask, guys? We need to build an integration which is capable of importing journals in Fusion Cloud. And we need to share that integration endpoint details to HSBC. HSBC is going to trigger our integration, and they're going to pass in journals as input to our integration. Now, when I have to, so plain and simple, I need to build an integration to import journals using web service-based approach. So what is the first thing that I need to do, guys? I need to go into the documentation and see if there are any details. So we'll go into the documentation. And I will see if there is any standard SOAP service or REST API given by Oracle, which will help us import journals into Fusion Cloud. Okay, so that's why I came into the Fusion Cloud documentation link. Remember, we came to the same link in web service basic session as well. Yes or no, guys? Hope you still remember that. And we have two services here, two types of web services, REST and SOAP. Which one should we prefer, guys, out of these two, and why?
REST. REST should be preferred, but
yeah. What are the two reasons why we need to prefer REST?
Performance issue. Performance improvement.
Yeah. What's the second one? The second one is REST APIs always give you a instant result. Okay, yes. So not all SOAP services, but at least some of them, what they do is they only do half of the job. So say, for example, if you invoke a SOAP service and pass in a payload, so for example, if you take the journal import service itself, it's not going to create a journal in Fusion Cloud. Instead, it would just dump the data to interface table and it asks you to, and you need to plug in a lot more logic to process those interface records. Okay, so for that reason, we need to always prefer REST APIs. Only if it is not available, then we need to go in for SOAP because we don't have a choice, right? So I'm going to review REST APIs. And in the REST APIs here, so when I come into the screen, you see the REST APIs for Fusion Financials. REST APIs for Fusion Financials. And we are seeing the REST resources here. We are seeing the REST resources here. And if you pick up any of these resources, banks or accounts or branches, you know that there would be 5 endpoints which would help you to perform the CRUD operations. Now, what is it that we are interested in? We are interested in journals. So I search for journal here. I could see that there is a journal batch resource. There is a journal batch resource. And how many endpoints do we see here, guys? The moment I select a journal batch, I see 4. Which one is missing? If I select bank here, how many endpoints you see?
5.
5 endpoints: create, update, delete, and 2 read endpoints. But if you take the journal batches, you don't see the create endpoint. You have update, delete, and 2 read endpoints. So since we don't have a create REST endpoint for journal batches, what is it that we have to do? We are left with no choice but to go back and review the SOAP services. So we go into SOAP services, and in SOAP services, what is it that we're going to do, guys? So if you scroll down, you should be able to see a journal service here. You should be able to see a journal service. And once you see a journal, service, and what do we need to do with this WSDL URL, guys? First of all, when you pick a service, you would be able to see a service WSDL URL. You would also have description as to what this service is going to help you with. And these are the operations that you have in them. Now I copy this journal import service WSDL. And what exactly we need to do, guys? The journal import service WSDL. In this WSDL, I need to get the instance credentials. So I'll copy the ET80 instance link here. And so we are going to import the journals in ET80 instance, right? So since ET80 is our instance link, what do we need to do, guys? In this WSDL URL, all of you know this very well, right? You have a server name in it. What do we need to do, guys?
We need to replace it with the server.
With a Fusion Cloud instance link, right? And now I would go ahead and copy this link. And is there a quick way for us to validate whether this is a valid WSDL or not, guys? We can go ahead and do this, right? ET80 WSDL URL. Now, if I put this WSDL in a browser, I'm able to see the complete details. I'm able to see the complete details here about the web service. So what does WSDL stand for? Web Service Definition Language. You have the name, description, and the operations as well. Now you see that there's an operation called import journals. What this operation would help you with, guys? It would create a journal in the journal interface table. So there's a table called GL interface. And if I invoke this service and if I pass in a couple of journal lines as input to this operation, if I pass in a couple of journal lines as input to this operation, those lines would be inserted to interface table, right? So that's what this operation is going to do. And how do we test this service, guys? Remember, before we build an integration in OIC, we need to do a kind of a POC, guys, for every integration you build to make sure or to understand what exact steps you need to plug into the integration. Okay, so we need to execute the steps to understand. We need to execute the steps to understand what we need to do the steps manually first to understand what should be the design of our integration or what are the exact steps that we need to plug in. Okay, so let's try to invoke this journal import service from a testing tool called SOAP UI. And we're going to UG63. I'm going to add this WSDL. And I want SOAP UI to create sample requests for all the operations. And what exactly do you see here, guys? You see that there are two folders created, HTTP and response. Ignore the response folder. Go into HTTP, import journals. And this is a payload that we need to pass into import a journal into Fusion Cloud. Okay. And before I explain this payload, let me first show you how a journal is going to look like in Fusion Cloud application. I'm sure most of you might already know what is a journal, but for the benefit of everybody, I've logged into Fusion Cloud application as a finance implementation user. And looks like we are seeing only a handful of groups here, only 5 or 6 groups we are seeing. which means somebody has customized this layout. So what you can do is you can get into any of the group, click on a plus icon, and you would see an option called reset. Hit this reset layout button so that all the other options get enabled, whatever Oracle enables by default. And I can go ahead and save and close. So if you want to see the GL related work areas, we have to get into general accounting screen and manage journals. Okay, now when you go into manage journal screen, so let's the first thing that you need to understand is, yes, there would be a ledger selected. Check the ledger, and it should be US primary ledger. If some other ledger is selected, you change it. If it is US, just leave it that way, because we're going to use this as or we will import the journals into this ledger. It's a seeded ledger given by Oracle in demo instance, and we will use that. And let me see if we have any journals in 12/23 period, guys. December 2023, because it's this period has just started, right? I'm not sure, or I don't think there would be enough journals. So if you look at this particular, if you look at 2023 period, 12 means December. So you could see that these are, what do you see here, guys? You see that these are all, there are journals coming in from various other sources. I think there are only a handful. Let me just change it to 11/20/23. See if we have any further journals here. Okay, we've got enough examples here. So if you see here, what exactly a journal is, guys? Normally, whenever any client implements Fusion Financials, guys, or Fusion or ERP Cloud, Fusion ERP Cloud, they would be implementing finance and SCM modules. And what exactly they would do, guys? Our clients would manage the ERP related operations in a Fusion Cloud application. Now, what does any manufacturing client do, guys? Okay, to keep it very simple, on a very high level, if I'm running a manufacturing firm, what do we normally do, guys? We buy raw materials from suppliers, we run it through a manufacturing process, and we sell the finished goods to a supplier, to the customers, right? That's exactly what we do. And these transactions that you do, right, they have a financial impact, guys. Say, for example, after I receive, so I create a purchase order, I receive a goods from my supplier. Do I have to make a payment? Yes or no? I should, right? And where do I do that payment from? I go to payables. I would create an invoice against that supplier or against that PO. And then I would go to payments and I would make a payment from that particular module, from the payments, from the payments functionality. And after the finished goods is ready, I would obviously be selling it to a customer. And for that, I would be raising a sales invoice or receivable invoice and send it across to the customer, saying that this is the amount that you need to pay me. So these the subledger, all the transactions that, or the transactions that happen in subledgers like payables, receivables, projects, or core HR, which have financial impact, would be which have financial impact would be they have to be accounted in those subledgers. And after they are accounted in subledgers, those accounting entries should be posted to GL. And when those accounting entries are posted to GL, here they will be created as journals. Here they would be created as journals. So if you see this the payables invoice, this is basically a journal for a purchase invoice, meaning a payment that needs to be done to a supplier. Okay, and when you click on this payment journal batch, okay, now the moment you open up a batch, just give me one moment, guys. So if you look at this journal, just to help you with a structure, so you have on a journal, you have three levels. You have journal batch, journal header, and the lines. And at the journal batch level, you have a journal batch name, description, accounting period. And a single journal batch could have multiple journals like this. And at the journal level, you have journal name, description, ledger, accounting date, category, And at the batch level, you have a source as well, currency. And one batch could have multiple journals, and each journal could have multiple lines. Now, at a line level, what is the information that is captured? Is you have line number and you have account combination captured, and you would also have amounts mentioned in there, whether it is a debit line or a credit line. What would happen if you transfer 100 rupees to your friend? Your account would be debited 100 and your friend account gets credited 100, right? So if it's a simple personal one-on-one transaction, it's just only the account number that gets either debited or credited. But when you're tracking the debits and credits in a complex ERP system, tracking the financial transactions or debits and credits only at the account level will not be sufficient, guys. Instead, we need to understand which company, which line of business, which account, which cost center, meaning which department is incurring that debit or a credit transaction. Because end of the year, the reporting would usually happen from a GL module. And for a reporting to happen, we need to have all these accounting details. Okay, without which the companies would not be able to run the business. So yes, when on a journal line, we have line number and we need to mention a code combination. And in the code combination, you have segments mentioned. Okay, like which company, line of business, account, and other segments as well. And for that code combination, again, you have debit and credits mentioned. So whether this code combination should be either debited or credited. So the details will also be mentioned here. And one thumb rule for a journal to get created, guys. Remember the debit and credit lines, the number of lines need not match. Here I have one debit line and two credit lines, right? They need not match, but the sum of debit amounts should match the sum of credit amounts. Okay, so this is something that should definitely match. Okay, so this is a structure of a journal, guys. Now, when we want the journal to be created, if you go into 7.journal import service payloads and notification, you have a request payload, guys, sample request payload, use that. And I'll just close this. I'll open it in a browser to make it easy for you guys to understand. Give me one moment. So if you look at this with the payload here, so the first section that you see, right? The first section that you see in the header here. So these are basically the parameters that you need to pass when you run import journals job. See, point number one, when you hit this journal import service, if you pass a couple of journal lines as input, remember guys, for a journal to be created, you need to have at least two lines, right? One debit and one credit line. So if I pass in two journal lines as input to this particular service, it is only going to dump the data into interface table, guys. It is only going to dump the data into interface table, and you see that here as well, create journal in the journal interface table. And after the journal is inserted into a journal lines are inserted to interface table, we need to run a job called import journals job. And when you run that import journals job, you need to pass in a set of parameters, and these parameters are given at the top here. And after these parameters, you see that there is a GL interface line here. There is a GL interface line. And this GL interface, one GL interface means one single journal line. Okay. And if you look at the first line, yes, on the first line, we are mentioning a code combination, with which a journal needs to be created. Now, just one correction I want to make here, guys. Just one correction I want to make here. Yeah. So here we mention on the first line, you mention with what combination you want the first line to be created. And if you scroll down, you could also see that the debit amount fields are populated, enter debit and accounted debit. So we want to create the first line with amount as 100. And if you scroll down, you would be able to see the second line. And the second line, you have a different code combination altogether here. Remember, these are the combinations with which a journal would be created in cloud. So this would be the credit line combination. This would be the credit line combination with which it gets created. And the first line would be a debit line. And if you scroll down, you would be able to see the entered credit and accounted credit columns populated. Remember, guys, since we are building a service here without the help of core banking system, we would prepare a sample payload first to see what fields we need to pass for a journal to be created. And we would advise the HSBC core banking system accordingly. And where do we get these sample payloads from? If you go to support.oracle.com, you would be able to get the sample payloads, guys. Now, if I scroll down here, what exactly do we see, guys? So you see that there are two lines here. Okay, two lines. And the first line is a debit line with amount 100. Second line is a credit line. Now, on every line, remember every line in a journal, every journal line, it needs to belong to a batch. Or it should belong to a journal. And it should also belong to a journal batch. So there should be a link between a line and a header and line and a batch. So that's why what you normally see here is, so at the line level, you have two fields called reference 4 and 5. And you would be passing a journal name and a journal description here. Journal name and journal description. You pass it as reference 4 and 5 fields, which are right at the top. And you also mention the ledger ID in which you want the journal to be created, period as well. So I'm trying to import a journal in February 2023 period, and I've mentioned that accounting date. And there is also one more field called group ID that you mentioned at the line level, guys. I'll tell you where this comes handy. So for now, just remember that there is a group ID column at the line level, which we are populating as 4002. And you have a same group ID at the header as well, or at the top section as a batch name. So this is what we normally use to track the journal batch. Okay, so you have a batch name in the header, which we keep same as a journal group ID or line group ID. And what is it that we want to do, guys? We want to import, we want to see what happens if we trigger the journal import service with this payload. So I'm trying to import, and if you look at the journal header, guys, so this is the first line. I'm saying UG62 journal 1, right? So instead of UG62 journal 1, what is it that we would do, guys? I would just first change the batch identifier to 4001. I'm just putting it back to 1, and I'm going to do a replace all. And instead of UG62, I'm going to call it as UG63. And I would do a replace all. Now, what is it that I have to do? I just have to copy this interface rows, a payload starting from interface rows. And remember, both the journal lines belong to the same journal. Okay. I'm going to copy the interface rows. Go back into SOAP UI. I select interface rows. Be careful with the payload, guys. You need to copy it from a start tag to the end tag. Interface rows to the interface rows and paste it. Now we need to pass in authentication details. Of course, we know it, right? When we invoke a standard SOAP or REST APIs, we have to pass in authentication details. Yes or no, guys? If you don't pass it, what would happen?
400 authentication.
401. Yeah, authentication.
Authentication failure. Now I'm trying to trigger it with a two journal lines in it, and I've got back a response, and in the response you see a result and you see 0. Can it get worse than this, guys? We spent so much effort to get everything right, pass in the payload, and we triggered the service. We've got back a result of 0. When you get back a result of 0, it would be difficult to understand whether the lines are inserted into interface table or not. What is the interface table for journals, guys? It is GL_interface table. And if you don't know it, a Fusion technical consultant would help you with it. Now, how do we query the interface tables in Fusion Cloud? You go into Tools, Reports and Analytics. And this is a screen from where you can access the business intelligence server attached to Fusion Cloud. So from this page, I just have to click on Browse Catalog. And when you click on Browse Catalog, you would be able to see this login page. Sorry, the BA server page. To run a SQL query or any SQL query, I just have to click on a menu option. Under Published Reporting, you see Data Model. So this is what we use to run SQL queries in Fusion Cloud to query any of the tables. And this is exactly what we would be using in BIP reports as well when we do the outbound flow service. When we do the outbound flow service towards the end of the course, when we do the outbound flow service towards the end of the course, in this particular integration, we would discuss more on the BIP report. I'll show you how to create a data model and a report. I'll also talk about how to create a report for a data model and a lot of other stuff. But for now, let's just create a data model and query the GL interface table. Create a SQL query. So you just have to click on SQL query, add one, and you need to select application DBFSCM. What's the table name, guys? And
Journal import.
Yeah, for journal import, GL underscore interface is a table name. And what is the group ID that we used, guys? The group ID that we used is, let me just copy it.
4001.
Yeah, 4001, right? And this is exactly the same that you see as a group ID at the line level. Okay, we copy this and we pass this in. How many lines we should get, guys? If those two lines were inserted, when I run this query, I should be able to see 2 lines in here. And I see 2 lines in here as expected. And I could see that account combination, or two lines have the code combination here. And we also have entered debits, and we also have the debit and the credit columns populated. First one is a debit line, second one is a credit line. Now tell me one thing is, this is a batch name that I have used, right? So reference 1 and 2 is like batch and a batch description. Reference 4 and 5 are journal name and a journal description. Tell me one thing, guys. I see this batch here. Does that mean journal is already created, guys? Data is an interface table here.
No.
That's not created, right? So what do I need to do? So if I change this batch name and search for it, I don't find the batch. So what do I need to do? I have 2 lines in the interface table. And I want a journal to be created with this information. The way we do it is, we need to go ahead and run a schedule process. And which schedule process do we need to run to import the journals?
Import
journals is a job that we need to run. Click on OK. And we mention the journal source as other. And the group ID, we mention it as 4001. So I'm trying to submit import journals job here. And when I run this import journals job, it is prompting me to pass in 7 parameters as input. Data access set ID, which is same as ledger ID, US primary ledger. Remember, guys, the ledger ID that I used in the header here in the parameter section, and the ledger ID I mentioned in the lines, this ledger ID corresponds to US primary ledger. So I want the journal to be imported in. US primary ledger. Okay. So that's why you see when I try to run this import journals job, I need to mention it that way. And the moment I select US primary ledger, and what is the journal source that we used, guys? Journal source is other, right? Journal source is other. So I go ahead and pick up that journal source here. Immediately, I was able to see 3 batches here. So when I run import journals job, one obvious thing that I can do is I can say all group IDs here. And if I run this, what would happen, guys? This job is going to, or it would try to process all the interface records that belong to this batch, 9005 and 9006 as well. But do we have to really care about these 2 batches, right? Not really, right? Which is our batch of these 3? 4001. And I'm only bothered about my particular batch. So I want this job to run only, or to process only the records that we have in this batch. And the group ID would help you to restrict the import journals to process only records in your batch. And there are 3 flags here, which basically control how the journals get imported in Fusion Cloud. Okay, so should account errors be pushed to suspense? So we are passing in an account combination here, right? So if there is any problem with the account combination, Do you want the line to be still created with a suspense account, yes or no? So if you say no, any account error, journal not created. If you say yes, if an account has an error, then the line would still be created, but not with a suspense account. Okay, but with a suspense account, not with the actual account. If you say this as yes. Summary journals, if you have multiple lines in a single journal with the same code combination, all of them will be summed up and imported as a single line. DFF attributes, if you have any DFF configured on a journal, and if you want to import values into it, you say this as, you pass this as yes. So if you scroll down here, you see you have an option to pass an attribute fields. So what are DFF attributes, guys? Nothing but additional attributes that you can enable on a journal. Now, what exactly do you want to do? You just want to submit this request, and this import journals job, once you submit it, you're going to get back a request ID. And I'm going to apply a filter to see only the jobs that are submitted by FINA MPL user. So you see this job is in pause state. So this job has kicked off a child job, and child job has completed, both the jobs completed successfully. If you go to child job, output file, if you go to child job output file, you see a text file. You click on a text file, and when you click on a text file, you would be able to see the journal import execution report. You would be able to see the journal import execution report. Now you see that there's a group ID in here, 4001, and this is successful. Yes, there are 2 lines in it, and 1 journal batch and 1 header. And yes, in this batch, how many lines were created? Two lines, 1 batch and 1 journal header. And under batches created, you clearly see a batch name. So can I go ahead and search for this batch name now, guys? I should be able to, right? And when you search for a batch name, don't use accounting period, because you're searching with exact batch name. So you don't need a period. You can open this up. Now, when you open a journal batch, you see a journal batch in the header, journal batch at the top, and you see a journal, and you also see 2 lines created, and all the information that we passed. So whatever is the payload that we passed in here, so whatever is the account code combination that we passed in, with that combinations, debit and credit lines were created, and a journal batch and header are also created with the information that we passed in a payload. I said UG63 batch and journal. And I've deliberately tried to create this journal in a February 2023 period, the whole period. What's the reason, guys? The reason is I just want to avoid the period issues. Sometimes when I try to import a journal in, say, January 2024 period, I might get an error saying that period is not open. So to avoid such issues, I've created a journal in an old period. So in a nutshell, what are the steps that we need to do, guys, if I have to import a journal? I need to hit the journal import service, pass in the journal lines. This would insert data into interface table. And once the data is in interface table, I need to go ahead and run the import journals job. And this import journals job is going to pick up those interface records and create them as journals in Fusion Cloud. Now that the journal is already created, if I query the interface table, you would not be able to see those journal lines here anymore. You would not be able to see them anymore here. Okay. Now, so these are the steps that we need to plug in. Now, if we go back to the PPT, so if I have to import a journal, pick up journal import service, prepare payload and submit request. Data would be populated to GL interface table, and I need to run import journals job to create journals in ERP. Now, what are the steps that we're going to plug into the integration, guys? The first step in the integration would be to receive journal payload from a client. So HSBC core banking system is going to trigger our integration. So as soon as they trigger our integration, they're going to pass in journal lines as input. They would be passing in journal lines as input. And when they pass in journal lines as input, yes, you receive a journal payload from client. That's the first step. And with that payload, we would be invoking standard journal import service given by Oracle. With that payload, we would be invoking standard journal import service given by Oracle. And this is going to, so if you receive say 100 lines here, you map all of them, and or using all of them, you invoke standard journal import service, and this would import the data into interface table. And once the data is inserted to interface table, you would run import journals ESS job. And how do we run ESS job in cloud, guys? Is there any standard service that we can use, guys, to submit ESS job? What did we do in SOAP service basic session, guys?
We submitted a schedule request.
Yeah, using submit ESS job
Submit
request
ESS.
operation in ERP integration service. So we would just make use of the standard service to run import journals job in Fusion Cloud, because this service is only going to do half the job. So we cannot certainly ask the user to run the job manually. Since we want to kick off the job as well, we would use this ERP integration service submit ESS job. And after we submit the job, we are going to plug in a logic in the integration to make it wait until this job completes. So we're going to make use of a while loop. And with the help of a while loop, we'll make the integration to wait until the ESS job completes. And within the while loop, what is it that we're going to do? We would wait for a minute. And after that, we would try to go to ERP Cloud and get the ESS job status. So when you submit a job here, you get back a request ID. You pass that as input to get ESS job status operation, you would get back a job completion status. So what exactly is the completion status of that ESS job? You would get it in the response. And the job completion status could be, what could be the job completion status, guys? It could be succeeded, error, or warning. So whenever an ESS job completes in cloud, the job completion status would be one among these three. If it is still running, there are plenty of other statuses possible, guys, running, pending, on hold, etc. So what I want to do is within the integration, based on the job completion status, I want to send out a relevant email notification to the support team as well as a GL team, stating that batch number 4002, batch 4002 is imported successfully, or batch 4003 has ended in error or warning because of so and so reason. So I want to show you, as part of this integration, I want to show you how to configure email notifications and send them out. And also when we configure the email notifications, I want to show you a lot of stuff here. Like, yes, you can hardcode the email IDs if required, certainly not a best practice. So I'll show you how to create a lookup, store the email IDs in that lookup, and I would show you how to configure a notification, pulling email IDs from a lookup and using it in the integration, so that people, even if people change tomorrow, we don't have to worry about it. A business user on the client side would be able to help themselves. They're just going to a lookup and update the email there. So this is a logic that we need to plug into our integration. Receive a payload, kickoff journal, import service, submit job, import journals job. With the help of a while loop, we make the integration wait until the job completes. And within the loop, you would try to get the job status. We wait for a minute and try to get the job status. Based on the job completion status, we send out a relevant notification. If the job is still running, we would loop through the steps again, wait for one more minute and try to get the job status again. Okay, so the end result is HSBC core banking system passes in a batch, journal batch as input to us, to our service. We do the end-to-end processing and we send them back a confirmation message. Since there are a lot of steps involved in importing journals, guys, like kicking off a service and running import journals job, and remember this service and the job also takes a bit of time in case you are dealing with more number of lines. So when we build services like this, where you have multiple steps involved in importing the data, like kicking off a service, submitting a job, and all that stuff, we usually build such services as asynchronous services, meaning we ask the core banking system to just trigger our service. But it's like they're going to trigger our service in a fire and forget mode. So they would trigger our service, pass in a journal batch as input, let's say 10 lines or 100 lines or 500 lines, and they forget about it. So we do the end-to-end processing, and then at the end of it, we would be sending out an email notification. Now, what are the connections that we need for this integration, guys? What connections we need for this integration? Step number one. Yes, after we build the integration, HSBC core banking system should be able to trigger our integration. So we need a trigger connection. And I'm going to create the trigger connection with a SOAP adapter. And in this SOAP connection, I'm going to enter a journal import service WSDL URL. So the standard journal import service WSDL given by Oracle, we're going to plug in that standard journal import service WSDL in a SOAP trigger connection. Why exactly do we do this? I'll explain it in the next 10 minutes. So we need a trigger connection, SOAP adapter, journal import service WSDL in it to receive input payload from client. And we also need to invoke journal import service and ERP integration service. Remember, these two are standard SOAP services given by Oracle. Now, to invoke these standard SOAP services given by Oracle, we don't need to create individual SOAP invoke connections. Instead, we can create one connection using ERP Cloud Adapter. And with that single connection, you would be able to invoke the standard services given by Oracle. Okay. Now let's go ahead and create these two connections. I go back into OIC. Let me create a trigger connection first. Journal import trigger connection. And I'm going to create this connection with a role as trigger. I'm going to use this connection only to trigger the journal import service. And when you create a when you create a SOAP trigger connection, you need to either enter a WSDL URL or upload a WSDL file. So this is a concrete WSDL URL, and you have an option to upload an abstract WSDL file. We already know how to use an abstract WSDL as a starting point, but in this integration, we're going to use concrete WSDL URL, and we would plug in this standard journal import service WSDL itself in a trigger connection. Now I'll tell you why we are doing this in a moment. Security policy, you know where this comes into picture, right? So when you trigger a journal import service using this connection as a trigger, this would come into picture, the security policy. So when you trigger the journal import service, you need to pass in payload. You need to pass in OIC logins as a basic auth. Okay, I don't want to, we have already seen how user and password token works, right? So we're not going to get into it again. So we'll just make use of basic auth. Test the connection. And we're going to save this. We also need ERP Cloud connection. So I'm going to create ERP Cloud. EOG63 ERP connection. Now think about it. Think about it and answer, guys. What role would be sufficient for this connection? If I think about a role, only from this integration standpoint, guys. So I want to use ERP Cloud connection.
Invoke will be invoke.
Yeah, invoke.
Is sufficient, right? Because we just have to invoke two services, right? But is it a good idea, guys, to create ERP Cloud connection, or whenever you create connections to a generic systems like ERP Cloud, HCM Cloud, FTP, database? What did I say, guys? You should always use the role as trigger and invoke, because the problem is once you create a connection, we cannot change the role. Now you might say, Prasad, what is the problem with creating this connection as invoke? Okay, you can create a connection with role as invoke and you will be able to achieve this use case. Okay, no problem with that. But tomorrow, if my friend wants to create an integration and in his integration, he has to use ERP connection as a starting node, as a trigger. Would my friend be able to use this connection, guys?
No.
No, right? So for that reason, when you create connections to the generic system, guys, think about it from a future usage standpoint as well. So always create the connections with generic systems as trigger and invoke. And yes, while that is while that connection gets tested, let's go into the OIC instance again. And we'll create a new integration. And we're going to, whenever you build integrations using web service-based approach, guys, we need to use integration style as application, because only when you create integration using this style, and when you activate such integrations, there would be endpoint URLs generated. And those endpoint URLs are what our client is going to use to trigger your integration. So when HSBC triggers, who needs to trigger my integration, they need to have a URL, right? We get that URL for an integration only when you create it as an application style. Meaning application means another application is going to start this integration. So I say UG63 journal import service. And the connection is tested successfully. I'm going to save this connection. Now, when you go into the journal import service here, remember the first thing that we need to configure is a trigger connection. So I'm going to use the journal import service trigger connection. And what exactly do we do in a first node, guys? Receive journals payload from HSBC core banking system. Okay, or else instead of mentioning a client name, I would just say client. Receive journals payload from client. And since I used, what is the connection that I used, guys? I have used the SOAP trigger connection here. Okay, I have used the SOAP trigger connection here in the integration. And the moment you use a SOAP trigger connection, what is it that you need to do? So within a SOAP trigger connection, you would have either mentioned a WSDL URL, or you should have uploaded a WSDL file. Okay, you could have either uploaded a file or you could have used a WSDL URL. So these, and what would happen when we use the connection in the integration? Yes, OIC is going to scan that WSDL URL. So we didn't use a WSDL file, we used a URL. So OIC scanned that WSDL and it is showing all the operations here. Now, the moment you pick up an operation, say for example, if I pick up import journals operation, now the operation that you pick up in a service within the trigger connection, remember guys, this is only going to determine what would be the request payload for your integration and what would be the response payload for your integration. Remember guys, it doesn't matter whether you use a concrete WSDL URL or whether you upload a WSDL file. What is this going to determine, guys? The operation that you select here, it would only determine the request payload and the response payload, guys, for the integration. And what I want is, when core banking system triggers my journal import service, when the trigger UG63 journal import service, I want HSBC core banking system to pass in the journal payload. I want the HSBC core banking system to pass in the journal payload in this format, guys. I want a core banking system, HSBC core banking system, to pass in a journal payload in this format as input to my service, Remember, this is the exact same payload that we need to pass as input to the standard journal import service. So yes, from within my integration, when I invoke journal import service, I need to pass in payload in this format. Okay, so from within my integration, when I invoke standard journal import service, I need to pass in this payload in this format. So when HSBC core banking system passes in a payload as input to me from core banking system, I want HSBC core banking system to pass it in this exact same format that I have to pass as input to journal import service. That's why what I'm doing is I'm using journal import service itself in a WSDL URL itself here in the trigger connection, and I'm selecting import journals here. So the operation that you select here, whether it is from an abstract WSDL file or from a concrete WSDL URL, the only thing this is going to determine is what would be the request payload for your service and what would be the response payload for your service base. Okay, please note that if there is anyone who is thinking that, yes, Prasad selected import journals from journal import service here in the SOAP trigger. So which means when HSBC core banking system triggers the integration, they are directly triggering journal import service, import journals operation. That is never going to be the case, guys. So this is not an invoke connection, it's a trigger connection. In a trigger connection, the operation that you select is only going to determine the request and response payloads, guys. Whether it is a abstract WSDL or a standard WSDL doesn't really matter. And there are two operations here, a synchronous version and a synchronous operation. Synchronous doesn't have sync keyword at the end. Asynchronous have async keyword. So if you select synchronous operation, you have a request and a response payloads, guys. And if you select asynchronous, you would only have request payload. There won't be any response. So if you select a synchronous operation, guys, you would have request and response. And let's see what happens, guys, if you have request and response. Now, when you configure a trigger connection with a response, what would OIC try to do, guys? Would it help you a bit there? And what does it try to do? If you create an operation over the request and a response pattern, you see OIC creates a response element, and it also generates a mapper as well. Because before we send a response, there would be a mapper generated, right? Isn't this the same behavior that we have seen in a Hello World SOAP service as well, guys?
Yes.
But it's just that we uploaded a WSDL file there. And when we went into the mapper, we have seen first name greeting here. But instead of using WSDL file, we are using a standard URL now. But what is the problem with building a journal import service this way, guys, as a synchronous service? If the last node in the integration is a return element, what does it mean? It means that whenever first of all, to import the journals into cloud, I need to import a lot of steps here, guys. I need to call a journal import service and submit a job, and a lot of steps involved here. And it might take a bit of time for those steps to be executed or completed. So when HSBC core banking system triggers your integration, if the last node in the integration is a response node, that means HSBC core banking system, it would keep waiting until you do all the steps and send back a response. Okay. So if you build the integration as a synchronous service, you receive a request, you send back a response. Whenever there is a response element, what would happen? When HSBC core banking system triggers our service, you pass in journal payload as input. And if it is a return element, that means HSBC would have to wait until we do all the processing and we send back a response. But is this a behavior that we need, guys? No, because we don't want HSBC core banking system to wait for 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes until we do all the processing. Instead, what we tell them is, boss, you just trigger our integration as a fire and forget. So you trigger our integration, pass in a batch with 100 lines or 500 lines and forget about it. We will plug in logic here to process a journal, and based on the journal import status, we would also let you know whether the journal is imported successfully or not. We're going to send out an email notification to the journal team or GL team as well as the support team. So I don't want to build this as a asynchronous. Asynchronous means it looks like this. There's a return element and a mapper. Return element means anybody who calls a service will be made to wait. So what is it that I want to do? I want to build this as an asynchronous one, because synchronous we'll see in the next integration. And what does asynchronous mean? Asynchronous means I need to select the asynchronous operation here. And the moment you select asynchronous operation, what do you see, guys? You only see request, which means the last node in the integration would change to a stop node, which means you can only pass an input. You don't get back any response. So since I'm selecting async, you only see request, no response. And you click on no. And since the message exchange pattern is one way, what is the behavior that you would notice, guys? You say apply. So what's the behavior that you notice now? You see that there's only a trigger node. Okay, so core banking system is going to trigger the integration pass in a journal payload. And the last node in the integration is a stop node, which means when integration is triggered, when core banking system triggers our integration, since it is a stop node, they will not be made to wait until we process the journals. Now, what exactly do we need to do here, guys? Yes, we receive a journal payload here. And with that payload, I need to kick off a journal import service. So we'll go ahead and use UG63 ERP connection. I'm not able to see it here because I got into the integration before the ERP connection is saved. So I'm just going back into the integration again. I'm using ERP connection. And what exactly do we want to do, guys? We want to invoke journal import service. Now I'm using ERP cloud connection. And if you want to invoke standard SOAP or REST APIs given by Oracle, you need to use this CRUD operations, guys. The first option, query, create, update, or delete. And I go to the next screen. Here we will be able to see three options: business objects. We don't use them anytime, guys. Services. This would help you to invoke any standard SOAP service given by Oracle. And we also have REST resources. So you can use this option to invoke any standard REST API given by Oracle. So we'll use services in this integration. We'll use REST APIs in the next one. Now, which service do we want to invoke, guys, first of all? Journal import service. Now, the moment I select a service, I should pick up an operation. Like what exact operation that we want to invoke in that particular service. Now, what operation do we want to use, guys? Import journals operation. So I'm using ERP cloud connection to invoke standard journal import service, import journals operation in it. Now, the moment I click on done, what would happen, guys? Immediately there would be a mapper generated. And as soon as you invoke a standard service given by Oracle, guys, there would be a mapper generated. And when you get into a mapper, what do you see, guys? On the target side, you will be able to see the payload that we need to pass as input to standard journal import service. So when we triggered a journal import service given by Oracle, what is the payload that we passed, guys? It is this payload that we passed. Couple of journal lines and the journal import parameters at the top. Right? So the journal import parameters at the top and GL interface tab. Now let's get into a mapper. On the target side, you would be seeing the exact same thing. So it doesn't matter whether you invoke a web service from an integration product or from a testing tool, all of them would do the same thing. What do they do, guys? Operation, request message, data type, it goes to XST and it prepares a payload. So you see the import journal parameters at the top and you see a GL interface row here. Now, and another important point that you see here is for GL interface, you see that it is a repeating row. What does a repeating row means, guys? Meaning you can repeat this GL interface row as many times as you want. So depending on the number of lines you get from core banking system, if you receive 1,000 lines, you map all of them. And how do you pass those journal lines as input to the standard service, guys? Multiple lines, just by mapping the repeating element. So we'll see this in detail tomorrow. And if you look at the source payload, if you look at the format in which we are receiving a journal payload from core banking system, remember this is the exact same. This is a format in which we receive a payload from a HSBC core banking system when it triggers a journal import service. You have import journal parameters and you have GL interface row as a repeating row here. And one GL interface row means one single journal line. Now, if you look at these two payloads, it's exactly the same. Now, everybody is clear on this one, right? Since we are invoking journal import service, this is the payload that we need to pass in, and that's exactly the same thing that we have seen here as well. But how are we making sure that HSBC core banking system passes in payload in this specific format as input to our service, which is exactly same as journal import service, guys? How did we achieve this? First of all, we have used the standard journal import service WSDL itself in a trigger condition, and we selected import journals manipulation. And what do we know? From the web service basic session itself, we know that whatever operation we select, it's going to determine the request and the response payloads. Now, why is this a best practice, guys? So what else we could have done? So for example, if you see here, so you have, say, at the line level, you have almost like 50 plus attributes, guys. Or let's say you have total 100 attributes on the journal import service, but client, let's say, uses only 20 or 30 of them. Okay. And so let's assume that Abhinav is building this integration. What else could Abhinav has done, guys? Instead of using the journal import service WSDL in a trigger, what Abhinav could have done is he could have created an abstract WSDL file. He could have created an abstract WSDL file. And in that abstract WSDL file, he could have created a request and a response data types. And here he could have mentioned those 30 attributes. Yes or no, guys? Instead of greeting, it would be import journals. He could have put in 30 attributes here and in the response as well. But what's the problem with it, guys? So yes, he uploads that journal import service WSDL in the trigger connection. Instead of WSDL URL, he uploads that WSDL file. How many fields would he see? Would Abhinav see here? Not 100, he would only see 30 of them, right? And he would map the 30 fields to the standard journal import service. Okay, yes, build the integration, tested it, delivered. Tomorrow or 1 week down the line or 2 weeks down the line, we need to, or client wants you to import additional attributes. Clients want you to import additional attributes onto a journal. So let's say they have defined 4 or 5 new DFF attributes. And from tomorrow, when they trigger the journal import service, they want the journals to be imported with DFF attributes. What should Abhinav do, guys? So earlier they were importing 30 attributes, now they want 35 fields to be imported on the journal. Abhinav needs to make change all the way. So he has to edit the WSDL, add in those 5 attributes here. Then he needs to edit the connection or refresh the metadata on the connection. He needs to bring down the service and refresh the connection. Only then he would be able to see additional 5 attributes, and then he maps those 5 attributes as input to the standard journal import service. And say 1 month down the line, there is another requirement. The client now wants to implement one more flag or import one more flag into journal. We need to repeat the same process again, yes or no, guys? Edit the WSDL, edit the connection, edit the integration, do the mapping. Instead of all this nonsense, what else we could do, guys? Whatever are the fields that you can import on a journal, just expose all those 100 fields here and map all those 100 fields as input to the standard journal import service. And when client tries to trigger our integration, yes, they would have a provision to pass in all the 100 fields as input. But yes, when they see 100 fields, that does not mean they have to include all of them in the payload, guys. If your client says, Prasad, it is confusing, I'm using only 30 fields out of 100, but I'm still seeing a lot of other fields as well. But can I remove them? Yes, your answer is straightforward. Yes, dear, whatever, the fact that you see 100 fields doesn't mean you have to pass values in all of them. If you only need 20 today, you pass only 20 valid fields. If you need 30, you pass it only 30 fields. Plain and simple. But internally, what do? We still map all the 100 fields as input here. So that tomorrow, if today, if they don't need to use attribute columns, they would not have these fields. They would not have these fields. And tomorrow, if they want to import attribute fields, they would just add these tags in a source payload, in the journal import payload that they're passing as input. We don't need to make any change in the integration or the connection, or absolutely zero change is required. So that is why this is considered as a best practice. So wherever possible, or if possible, expose the standard journal, expose the standard service itself in a trigger connection, and get the request payload from a client in the same format that you have to pass as input to the journal import service. We'll stop here for today, and we'll do the mapping part tomorrow. Any questions, guys, from anyone? Perfect. Thank you, guys. See you tomorrow.